Welcome to another episode of Pacific Rims. I'm Ric Bucher. That is Greg Stolt. And Greg, let's start. This is still an introductory episode for us. The first couple are going to be like that as we get allow our audience to get to know us and what we're going to be bringing to them. And then we plan on bringing guests in from every continent, every nation, depending on what the particular subject is. But I wanted to start, Greg, with our relative experiences being introduced to China as a culture, being there as a country, and being introduced to the basketball culture and what our impressions were. And so since I think mine predates yours, and yours is certainly more current, I will tell you that in the early 2000s, well, mid to late 2000s was when I was most steeped in Chinese basketball, in large part because I befriended Yao Ming. His agent came to me, had been approached. This was before Yao was actually drafted by the Houston Rockets. He was projected to be very potentially the number one pick at the time. And Bill Duffy, his agent, has been a longtime friend of mine, and he lives same in the Bay Area, a little east of me. And he said, "Hey, look, there's all these writers that are coming to me saying, that they want to write a book about Yao." And he goes, "I don't really know any of them. I know you. Would you be interested?" And I said, I don't want to write about a book about a guy if he's just a sensation because he's Chinese and he's going to be drafted. If he's not a player, then and it's just sort of a spectacle or a little bit of a show pony. I'm not interested in writing that book. And he said, I said, "I'd want to see him play." And he said, "Well, I'm leaving for Shanghai this weekend. Do you want to go?" And this is what, we're talking like on a Tuesday or Wednesday. And I said, "Sure, I'll go." So we flew, I think it was like Thursday or Friday, flew in, caught Yao's last game for the Shanghai Sharks in the regular season Chinese Basketball Association. And my impression was that this was like Division III basketball level. And it was an unheated arena. There were guys sitting on the bench in puffy coats. And Yao obviously was just dominant because of his size. But he made two plays where one, the ball went to the floor, he went and got it, and he kind of flipped it over his shoulder to a guy to set up a fast break. And then there was another play. It was more of a pass play. Maybe it was a ball fake, little step through and a shot. And I went, okay, this guy can play a little bit. Like, that's the kind of stuff, if you add that with his size, I don't know how good he's going to be. I certainly wasn't thinking he's going to be like an 8-time All-Star or any of that, but I was like, he might be able to hold his own in the NBA in spite of the level of competition here that I'm watching, right? And so I also knew that the Chinese culture at that time, celebrity and I learned a lot about how like celebrity wasn't really a thing in Chinese culture, because I traveled with Yao after we went to the NBA when we would come back to China, and they didn't have any crowd control. Like, we would go to the hotel and there would be people waiting outside his hotel room, like for autographs and want to get a picture with him. And Yao would eventually go out and do it. And I said, why would you go out and do that? I mean, and he said, because otherwise they'll be there until like 5 a.m. Like, they're not leaving. and there's nobody here to make them leave. So let me just go ahead and get this done. Or we would walk through an airport, and obviously because of his size, everybody would immediately see him. And you would just hear this, like wherever it was, we would turn a corner and you'd hear this collective, and then a stampede, and just crushing him, trying to get selfies, like angle it so that they get a shot with him sort of in the picture. And so I was exposed to all of that, both the basketball and in that way, the culture. And I was thinking, that's when I got excited about writing the book, actually, because it was like, this is going to be such a change for him. And I don't know which way it's going to go. But on both the basketball and the cultural sides of things, this is going to be like a 180 from what he has experienced. Now, I will say that there was a real push to take advantage of Yao and the attention that he received and the attention that China basketball was receiving because of Yao. And the feeling was there was going to be a gateway, there was going to be a funnel created where there was going to be more Chinese talent. It was going to be developed in China, but then it was going to be scouted, and there was going to be an avenue for Chinese players to come to the NBA, and there was going to be more and more of them. And obviously, as we know, that simply has not happened. And so that's where I turn it over to you, because that's where I left it. And all I know is what didn't happen, but I don't really know why. And I don't have a full grasp of exactly where it is today compared to what I saw in the early to mid 2000s.
Yeah, going back to your story there about coming to China and watching Yao play and kind of being part of, the excitement, but also the craziness. And also, I guess the part where basketball was starting to kind of develop a little bit to become a little bit more professional. Back in those days was pre-NBA players, probably as imports. Basketball is popular, but it hadn't quite reached the global scale. And Yao comes on board. It takes me back to when we first moved to China, and I used to go to CBA games all the time. Part of my job was relationships with coaches and teams and administrators of different teams. And I would literally go to games, and I would walk into the gym, and I'd walk like I was supposed to be there and I was part of it. And I would literally sit half court on the court, and the guards would be like, okay, you're good. They wouldn't question me. Okay, he's a foreign guy that looks tall. He's tall. He looks like a basketball guy. Come sit down and have a good game. And nobody questioned me, and I would do that the whole season. You want to talk about development. There's no chance I'm getting through those doors now and getting in and sitting in those seats. I have to have connections with the teams. I have to have tickets. I have to have my passport registered and so forth. So that's an evolution of, I think you came probably at the end of the really good old days. And over time, it's become very, very much more professional, very much more organized. But it was kind of a fun, I guess, opportunity. You could basically go throughout every team in the league and walk in like you were supposed to be there, and nobody would question you.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's much better now. It's for security reasons.
Yeah.
Going back to your question, basketball here. I started paying attention around when you were here, and when you let basketball go. I started paying attention here, partially because of my job in the NBA, but partially because the media was becoming global about Yao Ming, and then after Yao was Yi Jianlian. There's a lot to unpack there and a lot to talk about. I think basketball is popular. Size is not an issue in China. You have a volume of people, but there are a lot of things I think that limit it. Partially it's geography. You don't have competition like you have in Europe or in the United States with Canada. And that kind of limits basketball development here, but there's a lot more underneath that probably has limited the amount of NBA players that have come out of the market.
Yeah. Yeah, there was the feeling with the development then was there was a very old school process of you practice like 8 hours a day, and it would grind players, and there was a feeling like they would be physically broken down by the time they might be of NBA potential, just because it was sort of this, constant practicing, running, all of it. And as we know, the training methodology has really evolved in terms of rest and sports science and biometrics and all of that stuff. And there was sort of a reluctance to embrace that in China. And there was also, as I remember it, you had to be very careful. Coaches coming in, anybody who was instructing or trying to coach the Chinese basketball coaches, is that you have to be very conscious of a feeling like that they didn't feel like you were talking down to them. That there was an esteem issue as far as showing the proper respect, or you weren't going to have their attention. They would turn their back on you. And I also remember, like, there were advantages in being a white American walking around in China, and there were also disadvantages. Like, I remember, talking to Yao at sometimes when someone would look at me a certain way, and he would say, "Yeah, that they're looking at you as a white devil right now." Right? There was that image, and I'll never forget when I don't know if this was after the book but I was over following, I believe I was following a series of exhibition games with the Melbourne Tigers from the National Basketball League in Australia, was playing a series of exhibition games across China. And for the most part, it was the same as what your experience was. Like, the Melbourne Tigers actually saved me. And there were certain games where I sat on their bench. I just walked in. Again, if you just looked like you knew what you were doing and you were supposed to be there, nobody would get in your way, especially as a foreigner. But there was one time where Yao invited me to ride on the Chinese national team bus. And let me tell you, the assistant coaches and the officials and everybody looking at me as I boarded on that bus and walked to the back of it with Yao. It was only because of Yao, and if not, they might have arrested me and taken me away, because it seemed like such a violation. You could just see it written in their faces, like, what is he doing here? But I don't know how much that has changed as far as the acceptance of outside influence when it comes to Chinese basketball and their willingness to be instructed, or to accept that, hey, you're at this level and we'd like to help you get to this level, but there's certain things that you don't know, or certain things that you need to change in order for you to do that. It always seemed like that was a very delicate dance to make that happen. And I wonder if anything has changed culturally, or because of the political climate, because it was also a very interesting time at that time, trying to create a bridge. And I feel like we crossed that bridge, and then somebody might have burned the bridge, and now we're trying to rebuild it. So I'm wondering from your experience there, like, what have you seen where those influences, the cultural influences, have affected the growth of basketball in China?
Sure. In the last 12 years I've been here, I think one of the things that has happened in China basketball is that the league and the teams and the agents have become much more connected with the world. So I think at your time when you visited here was probably the very beginning, where you were on the bus on the national team with Yao, and everybody kind of looked at you funny, and what are you doing here? And I think nowadays by now, with technology, with relationships, with people traveling and going to summer league, and import players coming from all over the world at a very high level, I think that bridge has been crossed, and that's yesterday's news. And as a result of that, you probably see on every CBA team at least one or two foreign coaches from the U.S., from Europe, or from Australia, and even the national team level on the men's and women's side, at the youth side, at every level, 3-on-3 side, you see foreign coaches here supporting. They're either leading or supporting teams. I think one of the biggest stories, and I got to know Brian Gorjan quite well. He was an assistant coach with the men's national team. He was in multiple CBA teams, starting in Dongguan or Shenzhen, here in Shanghai, and throughout the country, 3 or 4 different teams. And he told me the biggest challenge he had, great coach, won a silver medal at the Australian national team in the Olympics, I think in Tokyo, was here for years, and he said the biggest challenge he had as a coach here was language, and he wants to build relationships with his players. He, particularly his point guards, he wants to be able to communicate them directly. But anything he said, he had to have somebody at his hip to translate. And similar to my experience in Japan, for him to really achieve the goals that he needed that one-way communication channel, and ultimately he needed somebody that could communicate for him. And so the trust and the relationship that he had with his interpreter was probably as important, if not more important, than the relationship with anybody else in the team. And so there, you may have a good or bad one, and that could really dictate your success. But ultimately, going back to your question, I think this market here in basketball has matured so quickly in the last 15 years. And maybe you could say it's because of Yao or maybe Wang Jiji that started the wave of these teams being more aggressive to connect and identify coaches and players, to where somebody like yourself or myself here in China is not that big of a deal anymore.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's encouraging to hear. And based on what you have said about how the CBA has evolved, that makes a whole lot of sense. I will say that when it comes to interpreters, when I first started writing the book with Yao, we had an interpreter, Colin Pine, and
former colleague.
What's that?
He's a former colleague, a great guy.
Yes, loved him. But I knew that like the very first session that we had at Yao's house in Houston, and I would ask a question, and Colin would, I would assume, translate it, but I could tell he wasn't just translating my question, because it was almost like he and Yao would have a conversation, and then he would bring me back an answer. And I was thinking, this is Yao Ming according to Colin Pine, and I don't want to write that book. And so I thought, I literally left that session, our very first session. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know. Like, how do I have to give the money back if I don't write this? I was not excited. And so then I ran into, well, first of all, I learned that part of the reason that Yao used Colin was not so much because he needed everything translated. He understood all the English, right? But what he wanted was the time to be able to formulate an answer that he knew was going to fly on both continents. That it was going to, it wasn't going to cause any problems in China, and it was going to be what the U.S. would want to hear from the number one pick, right? And so he was just using it as a buffer. And I flew to Hong Kong. That was the beginning of that exhibition tour with the Melbourne Tigers and the Chinese national team. And I got to the hotel, and I think I called Yao's room, and he came down, and he walked in, and he had taken an elbow to the forehead in the previous practice. And he walked in and he said, "You see this?" He goes, "It looks like the Mercedes-Benz symbol." And I went, "You know what? We're going to be able to do this, and we're not going to need an interpreter." And the only tricky part is that I didn't want, his English was fairly simple, and I didn't want it to sound, I didn't want him to sound simple, because I knew he was intelligent. I knew the vocabulary wasn't where it was going to be by the time the book came out. So I kind of had to figure out, like, how could I rewrite stuff that with words that would be in his vocabulary down the line, but might not be at that given time when we spoke, right? So that was one of the tricky parts with doing it. But by and large, all of our conversations after that first one were Yao and myself just having conversations in English. And that made all the difference in the world, just in terms of developing our relationship too. So I totally get where, like, your interpreter, like, you have to have a closer relationship with them almost than, you have to know that they are representing you in every way rather than representing themselves or representing the person that you're talking to, right? That's the key. I'm glad you brought up point guards, because that's also the question that I have is we've seen by and large big men from China make it, and we've seen a few handful of Japanese players sort of make it, either make an impression somewhere, the NBA or whatever. We really haven't seen that from China, and I'm wondering why you think that is, in particular. I'm pausing because I'm thinking about what I was told at the time, which was just the style of play, and there wasn't a freedom given to players on the floor to be true point guards. Like, it was very coach controlled. And so for a point guard, for a guard to be able to play outside of China, they never developed that floor leadership that would be necessary to play. And I wonder how that is now.
Yeah, I think that's going back the last, 8 years when we started the NBA Academy program globally, working on this program with Joe Tsai to identify talent that can go to high school or prep school in the United States. Just looking at talent in general, anywhere, not just China, but anywhere. I think the first thing is playing point guard, in my opinion. I never played point guard, but it's in the most challenging position in basketball. It's the most, you have to be able to communicate. So if you can't speak English, how are you going to translate your skill sets into a NCAA or an NBA locker room?
Yeah.
You can't understand the coach. You can't understand the teammates. You can't communicate to your teammates or your coach. And so that's going to eliminate a lot of guys if they haven't studied English, which most probably haven't. Then the skill sets, the ability, the athleticism of a point guard or a two guard in NCAA or in the NBA is incredibly high level. And that's not to say the small forward, power forward, big men, centers aren't high level skills, but in general, I think the tangible, intangible skill sets of a point guard are much in the learning curve to be able to be successful at a high level is really, really challenging. Where nowadays, a guy like you take somebody like Wang Jiji, who played in the NBA for a few years, had some periods of success. He would be perfect in the NBA. He's a 6'11" guy that can stretch the floor with a 3-point shot.
Yeah.
That's a skill set that if he does that with some rebounding, with some defense, he's got a spot in an NBA team and potentially for a long time. And so I think really the biggest thing is not necessarily the training that they do here. I think the first thing is it's an incredibly challenging position to play point guard. I think the next thing is probably the access. Training is part of it, but I think China, where it's at, there's not enough opportunities for talented young players to play at a very high level on a consistent basis. So good, young, up-and-coming guards here to see competition in the U.S. or Canada or in Europe or Australia, the four best basketball playing markets, those players aren't going to get enough experience or exposure at a development age. And so you take some of the better guards that have been kind of playing here and developing here, sometimes their first experience playing against a potential NBA prospects when they're 20, 21 years old. And that's probably a little bit too late. And so I think those are probably the high level reasons why you haven't seen a lot of guards that have come out of the market here. Of course, we've seen Kawamura out of Japan. He's a little bit of a different story, but there's not been, you haven't seen many guards out of Asia because of those reasons, in my opinion.
What do you know about Jacob? Is it Xu?
Yeah, so I know a little bit about him. He's young. I guess one of his parents, I believe his mother's Chinese, father's from the U.S. or somewhere in North America, and he's played on the junior national team here for a couple of years. So basically he's a kid that's grown up in the American system, and he's developed and trained and gone to school and played AAU, and I believe he's on OTE now. But he's played in the United States and he's been brought over. And to me, in that strategy is a good idea. If he has a background, one of his parents is Chinese, they brought him over to interact and play and compete with and train with the junior national team here. I think that's a very good start to bring somebody with that experience and that capability to work with the players here.
So
I don't know a lot about him, but I do know he's in the system here. He's part of the junior national team program.
So Jacob grew up in the States, and then
I believe he's born and raised in Atlanta.
Okay,
In that area.
got it. Because so there was one guard, Sun Yui, who you may have seen. Did you see him play in the CBA?
He played a bit at the end of his career in the CBA. I've met him once or twice with NBA, did some events. We had him participate.
Yeah. So I saw him, again, this was when I was steeped in Chinese basketball, no matter where it might be. And I heard about the Ashen Olympians. The owner, I think it was around, and am I pronouncing it Sun Yui? Is that correct?
Sun Yue.
Sun Yue.
Yeah.
So Sun Yue, the owner, Winston Lee, didn't want him playing for I think it was the under-20 Chinese national team. And so the Chinese Basketball Association said, well, if you're not going to allow Sun to play for the national team, we're not going to allow the Olympians to play in the CBA. So Winston Lee, he strikes me as sort of the Chinese version of the Lakers' late owner, Jerry Buss. Sort of a older, rich, playboy type. You know, when I first saw him at a game in California, he had like 6 or 7 very young, beautiful women surrounding him. I saw Dr. Jerry Buss do that very same thing. Followed him up one time up to his owner's suite to do an interview when I was doing a piece on Kobe and Shaq. And so I've seen that model before. And but he brought the Olympians over to the U.S. and based them in Southern California, and we're playing in what was the American Basketball Association, sort of a minor league. And Paul Shirley, who played NBA a little bit, is now a writer. I got to know him from that team. Fred Vinson was an assistant coach, is a great shooting coach in the NBA, has been with a number of...
I've had Fred over for some clinics here in China in the past. I know his wife from Florida, University of Florida.
I'm a big fan of Fred's, and I think that he's a tremendous shooting coach. But he was an assistant on that team, but Winston would literally sit behind the bench, and it was all about Chinese development, about developing players. That's why he brought his team over. That's why the whole organization behind Sun. And so there were times where, like, LeShun Daniels was the coach, and he would try to win. He was trying to win every game, and he would get a tap on his shoulder, and Winston's sergeant at arms or right-hand man would say, you need to take one of the Americans out and put one of the Chinese players in. And so he was literally getting instructions from Winston on who should be in the game. And I think they only lasted a year or whatever. Sun had the nickname Q-Tip. I'll never forget that, because he had this like fuzzy topped hair and he was skinny as a rail. But he had a little bit of talent. I mean, he was drafted, I think, in the second round, 40th pick by the Lakers. But
he won a ring, I believe, with the Lakers. He
won a ring. Monk Batur also won a ring. I think the two Chinese nationals who have rings. But then that was the last I heard of any Chinese guards, and Zhu is the first that I've heard since then. So I just wonder, like, when you look at Chinese basketball development, there has to be the talent there, and I would think it's just like, how do they get the exposure? Yeah. Is it traveling? Is it doing more international work? And where is China on that? I mean, are they at liberty to, if they wanted to, like, to take the national team or take players wherever they want in order to develop them? Or is there still a feeling like we want to keep everything? It's a little bit like when I was at ESPN. Like, ESPN would build a studio in LA. They'd build a studio in New York. But Bristol, Connecticut was still the hive, and they would pull things back to Bristol all the time, just because they wanted to feel like they had control on their universe. And I always kind of felt that with China, like they wanted to kind of build everything at home as opposed to going elsewhere or allowing their talent to go elsewhere.
So I think that may have been news of the past when you were with Yao and even before that period of time. I feel like in my experience here in the NBA and identifying talent for the academy and placing kids into our academy in Australia and identifying players that would participate in our short-term events for a week or 2 weeks during All-Star or whatever. I didn't feel like there was a central body that was controlling things. It was multiple factors, and in all honesty, I think it's gotten a lot. It's become much more market based, much more opportunity based, a little bit easier than certainly what it was in Yao's era. And so, what I experienced with the NBA Academy was you had to look at talent. You had to basically go to every event, every camp, every tournament, watch players and look at them and rank them and kind of evaluate them and to identify, what kid at 13 years old is going to be maybe a potential NCAA player at 17, which is really challenging because you don't know their mentality, their skill sets, are they going to grow or not, and so forth. I think the big thing now is the market's developed so well for athletes here that you can make a career and a great living. And it's not necessarily the top saying, no, you can't take our players. It's more of, well, a CBA team or a sports bureau has offered my son this salary plus housing plus meals. And, going to Australia to the NBA Academy for a scholarship sounds good. That's a great opportunity, but, they're going to become pro right away and they're going to make a living and they're going to make money. Yeah. That sounds to me like a better deal. And so you're dealing with that probably more now than what it was 20 years ago. Yeah. And so out of it, you really had to recruit and talk to parents and talk to people that were influential in these kids' lives. Hey, do you really want to go and see how good you can be? Well, we got this great setup in Australia with NCAA coaches, and you'll be playing competitions all over the world, which may allow you to have a chance to play in college. And now with NIL, maybe that's an opportunity for players. There's a handful of players in college basketball now from China that are also making money. And so at the end, they're benefiting like they would as professionals here in China.
Speaking of guys who have made the jump, I got a chance to see Yang Hansen with the Portland Trailblazers play the Warriors. It was a blowout win for the Warriors. But I was interested. I stood courtside and watched him warm up, and I wanted to get a feel for his game and how he moved. And it's intriguing because I think that game, it was a blowout win for the Warriors, and he got about 12 and a half minutes. Only shot threes, made one of them. I mean, it was the 5-out or the stretch 5, classic stretch 5. And the big question is for me with him and his NBA potential. Like I could see him in that role of, 10th, 11th, 12th man, but making the leap. I don't know if the athleticism, the ability to move is there because the game has just become so ultra athletic. I think his skills are there. Like if it was just skill based and we were say 15, 20 years ago, I think that he would have, I'd look at it and say, you know what? I don't know if he'll start, but I could see him being a rotation player and doing okay. The challenge is going to be how agile and athletic can he get? How much can he squeeze out of his body in order to be able to move defensively, basically to defend the pick and roll? That's what it comes down to. Yeah. Like, can he do anything other than drop coverage in defending the pick and roll? And if he can, then you can utilize his skills offensively as a stretch 5, opening up the floor or whatnot. And that to me I think is going to be the challenge for him and anybody, any Chinese big man at this point, coming over to the NBA is going to be where is your athleticism?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think he's really talented. I mean, and going back to what you said early on about your experience at the CBA, how do you watch somebody like Yao Ming, obviously take out his size and agility and all that, but how do you watch him and his skill sets and think, okay, Yao can do A, B, C, and D in the CBA.
Yeah.
That'll translate into this in the NBA.
Yeah.
Because the leagues are different, the style of play is different, the rules are different. And so I think the same goes for Yang Hansen. When you watch him here, and I've watched him for a number of years, he's really a special player, very unique with his footwork, and he can catch. He catches the ball. He's great hands. He has good fundamentals. But a lot of the other things are kind of hidden because of the way the CBA play is and the rules and so forth. And then when you put him into the NBA and the G League, it's a little bit exposed. I think the biggest challenge with Yang is he was the 16th to 17th pick in the NBA, and that puts a real immediate bullseye on his back. Yeah. You've got to produce and that's not just for the Trailblazers, but that's for other players playing against him. That's for the media watching. And I always thought it was okay for him to stay here as long as he did. I think he's 19 years old or 20 years old when he got drafted. I always thought it would have been better and we tried a little bit while I was in the NBA to get him into camps, into training, into some tournaments.
Yeah. Just
to get some experience outside of your comfort zone, to get tested a little bit, he's going straight into this thing not knowing English fluently, never living abroad by himself, having to get used to new food, locker room culture in the G League and the NBA, and then he has to play basketball. I think we got, in my opinion, hopefully there's patience behind the management there, so he has some time to develop and to grow. I'd like to see this year as a training year, and then obviously next year to see an opportunity for him to see where he develops from this year's experience.
Yeah, I mean, the other difficulty he has is he's got Donovan Clingan in front of him, and another young big who I think is very talented, very skilled, kind of in a different way. But, it's like, can you develop two young guys like that at the same time? That's a big challenge when you look at where the Portland Trailblazers are right now. And this is where this is not Yang's fault. In fact, the one thing I like about him is he does have a good spirit about him, and he does look comfortable in spite of all of the cultural challenge or language challenges. Like he looks like he's got a vibe with his teammates and likes where he's at. It's not like he's wearing this, this burden of being in an uncomfortable place. But so much for every NBA player, no matter where they come from, or they're, American players, it's all about, the fit and the role and where you start and even your coaching and your teammates. Because if you're not utilizing and improving every second, there's another 60 guys coming the next year. And everybody around you is maybe advancing if you're not completely after it. And a lot of that is you can work as hard as you want, but if you're not in the right circumstance, if you don't have the right coaching, if you don't have the role that allows you to grow, it can be a challenge that through no fault of the player, ultimately it doesn't work out. Before we go, I do want to touch on, because I'm getting to know a little bit more about Joe Tsai's scholarship program and how it feeds into the Asian University Basketball League, which is your current main deal, and a project and venture that I'm really excited to see meet reality and become something, because I think there is a place for it. But I love what Joe Tsai is. The more I hear about this and what it's producing, like he doesn't get nearly enough love over in the States for what he is creating, because it almost is like he's single-handedly trying to do what I heard people were going to do off of Yao Ming coming coming into the fore, right? And Joe, it seems like Joe has picked up the mantle and is making that happen. So for the people who aren't aware of it, because I think most people in the U.S. are not aware of the Joe Tsai scholarship program, let them know exactly what he has going and how it ties in with the AUBL.
Sure. So the scholarship program is it's been 7 years running. And when I was in the NBA, I was very much involved in working with his team in Hong Kong to put this together. Since then, it's evolved incredibly into a much more professionally run group of people managing things. But the vision basically was providing kids from China opportunities to pursue basketball and academics, maybe outside of what they would have opportunities here in China. And so we got together 7 years ago, put a plan together on how to promote this opportunity, how to evaluate and select players, and obviously in identifying the right program in the United States to send players to. And so now I think it's year 6 or 7, and there's probably been about we had a couple COVID years where things were a little bit funny in terms of overall operations, but we've had about 30 or 40 kids go through the program. This is the first year because what we do is we do camps and identify kids to start their freshman year of high school. And so this will be the first year of players that have graduated from college, which is pretty exciting. To date, there's a male player at Long Island University and a female player at Northwestern University, which will be graduating. And then every year, 5 men, 5 women players get selected. So a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, a lot of coordination. Probably the highest level talent that's come out of the program is a kid named Sinan Huan, who just signed with Purdue. Will be a freshman next season. So it'd be really exciting to watch his progress. I don't know if there's a better program in the United States than a place like Purdue for him. Mm-hmm. And then there's a couple of kids coming up through the system that we just ran a camp this year that are pretty talented that'll have a chance. But it's a commitment by Joe Tsai to really provide opportunities for kids to get an education and to play basketball. And if things don't work out, they can always come back here and play professionally in China. Yeah. So it's really a unique, special chance for players from China to grow and develop.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love it. Do you know what the inspiration was for Joe? Was there something in particular or someone in particular that motivated him to start this and move in this direction?
I don't know specifically. I do know when he started it, Yao was the head of the CBA, and maybe there was discussion and how I can't say specifically, but maybe there's discussion on how do we scale basketball development, player training opportunities. There's a system here in China, but how do you get more kids involved and have more kids provide chances for kids that may not have those opportunities? I do know the opportunity with the NBA and the NBA Academy was fairly exclusive, and it wasn't really scalable. I think this program is really open to any kid in China that wants to sign up and participate in the program.
Yeah. And where exactly? I don't give me the thumbnail sketch of where we are with the AUBL, the Asian University Basketball League, as far as this upcoming season and the teams that you have established.
Sure, and we could probably talk a whole session on this, but the college basketball in Asia has been fairly it's not seen as a commercial entity, sort of the opposite of what NCAA's become. It's seen as an amateur opportunity for students to participate and represent their school. And so really in high school in Japan and in China and in Korea, high school is very popular. And then you have a bit of a empty space in college basketball. And then, of course, the professional leagues take over and they're marketing and promoting and really pushing the game of basketball. And so our CEO, Jay Lee, who's very close with Joe Tsai, came together and came with this vision of how do we fill that gap, not in obviously making college basketball a business, but really, I think, along with the business, the professionalism of college sports will grow and develop. And so the vision was to elevate college basketball, which is going to elevate the overall basketball ecosystem from high school to pro. Right now, we are in year 2. We are starting year 2 in August. We'll do a summer event tournament, and really we'll launch our inaugural season, home and away season, in November of 2026 into 2027. I said this in the last discussion. Scheduling is incredibly challenging. Every country's academic calendar is a little bit different. But it's, August is an open period, so we can do a tournament there. It's the home and away that's been really challenging to kind of put together, and that's why there's a little bit of a lag getting that going. We have teams from China, Japan, Chinese Taipei, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Chinese Taipei, and Mongolia that'll be participating this year in August.
Good stuff. Well, as you said, we will have an opportunity to dive more deeply into that, along with, and I think we've talked a lot of CBA and Chinese basketball in these first 2 episodes, but we will be talking about, I think, I'm thinking the next episode we may have to look at Japan and where they are, because there's a lot there to discuss, and look forward to having some guests who can give us insight, sort of boots on the ground, and experience, again, in terms of where things were and where they are and where they are going when it comes to the various professional leagues all across the Pacific Rim. So once again, thanks to all of you for joining us. Greg, we will do it again next week.
Thanks. Talk to you next week.